On April 26, 1986, the world changed forever. The Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant was a symbol of Soviet progress. 4 powerful rbmk 1000 reactors, not just energy, but pride in technological advancement. But the rbmk design had a critical flaw, a positive void coefficient. Simply put, the more steam produced inside the reactor, the faster the nuclear reaction grew. If the system entered an unstable state, it could be extremely difficult to control. This information was classified. Only top-level experts knew the risks. Operators on the control room floor did not. In 1986, the plant had already been running for 9 years, and on April 25th, the management decided to finally perform a long-delayed safety test. Would the turbine continue spinning long enough after a power cut to keep the cooling pumps running? A crucial test, but one repeatedly postponed. This night, it would finally be done.
The plan was simple: reduce reactor power, disable the emergency cooling system, disconnect the generator, and test the turbine's inertia. But at 2 p.m., Kiev's electrical grid demanded more power. The test had to be delayed for 9 hours. This was the first link in a dangerous chain of events. At 11 p.m., the night shift arrived. They had not been involved in planning the experiment. Their briefing was minimal. Working that night were Anatoly Dyatlov, Deputy Chief Engineer, operators Alexander Akimov and Leonid Tubtunov, and the entire night crew. Now, the most dangerous phase was about to begin.
Just after midnight, operators began lowering the reactor's power. The target was 700 megawatts thermal. But rbmk reactors behaved unpredictably at low power. A phenomenon known as xenon poisoning caused the reaction to stall. At 30 megawatts, essentially near shutdown, the reactor was deeply poisoned by xenon. According to protocol, the experiment had to be cancelled. Dyatlov refused. To raise the power, operators removed control rods, far below the safe limit of 30 rods inserted. At one point, only 8 remained. This was a severe violation. Now the reactor was unstable, but the control systems did not show the true internal state. By 1 a.m., they barely reached 200 megawatts, far lower than the required level. But Dyatlov ordered, "Proceed with the test." Before testing, automated safety systems should have been active, but many were disabled to prevent the reactor from shutting itself down. The emergency core cooling system turned off entirely. The rbmk was now like an aircraft flying with no engine and no parachute. At 1:22, the turbine was disconnected. It began to spin down. Pump power dropped. Coolant flow slowed. More steam formed in the reactor, and more steam meant more reactivity. A runaway loop had begun. At 1:23:04, indicators showed rising pressure and power, but the reactor was now unstable on a microscopic level. Some channels overheated, others stalled. The operators still believed they had control. They did not. At 1:23:40, the AZ5 button was pressed, a full shutdown. Control rods began descending, but the rbmk rods had graphite tips. As they entered the core, the graphite displaced water, briefly increasing reactivity. In normal conditions, harmless. But at that moment, with an overheated, steam-filled, unstable reactor,
it triggered a catastrophic power surge. Within seconds, the reactor output skyrocketed, 200 megawatts, 500, 700, close to 30,000 megawatts, more than 10 times its design limit. The reactor tore itself apart. At 1:23:48, the first explosion, a steam blast lifted the 3,500-ton reactor lid. Seconds later, a second, larger explosion. The building was destroyed. Burning graphite and fuel fragments rained across the site. Chernobyl had exploded.
At 1:28 a.m., firefighters arrived. They expected a routine fire. They had no idea the roof was covered with lethal radioactive debris. Among them, Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, Senior Sergeant Vasily Ignatenko, the fire crews of Pripyat. They climbed onto the burning roof, unaware that the glowing black blocks were pieces of the reactor core. Many would die within weeks. Inside the plant, operators Akimov and Toptunov desperately tried to pump water into the destroyed core, not knowing it no longer existed. Management refused to believe reports that the reactor is gone. They insisted an rbmk cannot explode. But it had. By morning, a radioactive cloud drifted toward Pripyat. Radiation levels in the city were already dangerous, but authorities delayed evacuation. Only on April 27th, 36 hours later, did they order the city to be cleared. Residents were told, "This is temporary. Bring your documents and essentials for 3 days." They would never return. The radioactive plume drifted across Belarus, Russia, the Baltics, Poland, Germany, Sweden. It was Swedish nuclear engineers who first detected abnormal radiation and forced the Soviet Union to admit something had happened. Thousands of workers, the liquidators, arrived to contain the disaster. They shoveled radioactive debris, built the sarcophagus, and risked their lives. Each roof run lasted 40 to 90 seconds. Any longer meant certain death. The Chernobyl disaster was not one mistake. It was the result of flawed reactor design, secrecy, violations of procedure, pressure from authorities, and insufficient operator knowledge. After the accident, the world changed. New safety standards, international monitoring, transparency, redesigned reactors. Chernobyl stands as a reminder. In nuclear energy, there are no small details, and the cost of wrong decisions can be immeasurably high.